Good morning, everyone. I hope you'll understand my English, and I expect you'll understand it much better than I understand your Croatian. I hope you can manage. This is the second international conference of the association we call INDTC, the International Network of Democratic Therapeutic Communities. We had the last conference in Rome 2 years ago, and we started this organization about 3 years ago, perhaps a little under 3 years ago. We've had some success with this network. It's very much a network. It's based on internet connections and exchanges, but we've had some considerable success with it. We have over 1,500 members, and people in 68 countries, or perhaps more, belong to it. People in South America, the Middle East, Asia, and so on, as well as Europe. The organization was started by a UK-based charity called Community Housing and Therapy, or CHT, which I'm the chief executive. And we started this network principally because we wanted to extend therapeutic community thinking and ideas outside the world of therapeutic communities, which was a very small world. And also we wanted to reintroduce some psychoanalytic thinking into this debate about the care and treatment of people who are suffering in our societies. So this is a sort of very general aim. I'm aware, being here, that the therapeutic community is a kind of cuckoo. You know that bird, the cuckoo, it goes and lays its eggs in other birds' nests. And in a way, the therapeutic community doesn't really belong in psychiatry any more than it belongs in children's services or in prisons. But it's able to somehow get inside and communicate within different discourses. And it's had a long history of being involved in being a perspective within psychiatric services, particularly for people with psychosis, but also increasingly for people with personality disorder. But even stepping back from that idea that the therapeutic community inserts itself in other discourses, I want to suggest that the therapeutic community itself is heterological. And that's something that's largely ignored in the literature. But to say this already situates the therapeutic community with a past, or really with pasts in the plural. And those pasts are the notions of community as they come to us from antiquity, and notions of therapy, which also comes to us from antiquity. For example, we live in a society which, particularly coming from North America, in which the individual is valued more than society, more than community. So we hear constantly on television that every individual can be who they want to be, achieve what they want, and everything must be focused on the fulfillment and happiness of individuals. Looking back at the history of community, just to take one example, Socrates would have seen things very differently. Socrates' idea of community is that the way you find your fulfillment is giving up your own will for the good of the group. sacrificing your own desires and your own wishes and your own agenda in service of others. But somehow, in some paradoxical way, your fulfillment comes from this idea of service. Or to take, that's the sort of example of community, but to take the example of therapy, I don't know if you know the letters of Seneca, the Epistolae Morales, absolutely wonderful letters about friendship. And Seneca, who was Nero's prime minister, I think, says in one of his letters that if words are going to be therapeutic, I think he's thinking maybe of somebody who's died, talking to somebody because someone close to them has died. If words are to be therapeutic, they have to be a bit like medicine. And when you take the medicine, you swallow it, and you have to wait for it to somehow affect the body from the inside. It takes a bit of time. And he says the therapeutic word is like that. You have to take it and somehow absorb it. Take it within you, this word. Hold on to it, ruminate with it, stay with it. And I was reminded of this a few months ago when I bumped into an old patient who'd been in one of our therapeutic communities about 20 years ago that I'd been working in. And he was a disheveled, chronic schizophrenic with an equally disheveled and chronic schizophrenic girlfriend, trying to catch cigarettes from people who were going into a cafe. And he recognized me. I can't imagine why, because, believe me, I didn't always look quite as decrepit as this. But he recognized me, and we started talking, and I took him and his girlfriend for a coffee, and he relieved me of a few pounds. And he said to me, "I always remember you, John Gale. You said to me in one of the groups, such and such." I don't remember what it was. It wasn't important. It was not a significant thing. But somehow it had spoken to him. And he'd held on to those words. And he said those words had helped him through the years. I was rather touched. But it also struck me how we don't know which are the words that are going to be the healing ones, that are going to really speak to the person, speak to their heart. Here in the University Hospital, I'm reminded that in the psychoanalytic tradition, which was taken up rather than started, I would say, by the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, he speaks of the symbolic, the idea of discourse, of language, words being the primary symbol. And it seems to me, again looking back to antiquity, that this idea of the symbolic as we find it in Lacan's work is really another way of talking about what in Greek antiquity was known as paideia. It's a hard word to translate, but it sort of gets translated both as culture and as education. But not education in the sense of going on a course, doing a course, passing the exam, and certainly not in the sense of learning facts. It's a bit like, an example might be listening to music. You could listen to a Wagner opera without ever having heard of Wagner and never having heard that music before, and be somehow transformed by it, grabbed by it, captured by it. Somebody else might know when Wagner was born, how his work fits into the general movement in the music in the 19th century, how it differs from Mozart, etc., etc., and know all sorts of facts and details about the music. but not necessarily appreciate the music in that deeper sense. What I mean by that deeper sense in the appreciation of the piece of music isn't being moved by the music. It's not an emotional thing. It's something like being changed by the piece of music. The music somehow speaks to you in a way that makes you get a different glimpse of yourself and the world you're in. It transforms you somehow. Like when you read a novel and suddenly it seems to speak to you. This is somehow all about your life. And you think, this is a fantastic novel. It really meant something to me. It really spoke to me at this moment in my life. And then you give the book to a friend and you say, this is the most fantastic novel I've ever read. It's really, really good. And they read it and they say, well, it's a bit of a bore. It didn't do anything for me. I didn't like it much. They were at a different place. It didn't speak to them in that transforming kind of way. I'm reminded here, thinking about paideia, the symbolic, education, culture, transformation. I'm thinking of my own experience of education. My old tutor, I used to be a Benedictine monk when I was younger, and my tutor in the monastery was a very learned monk. I thought he was terribly old, but I think he was about 40 at the time. I still correspond with him, and he's, I suppose, in his 80s now. And I think a lot about him, and he really begun my adult education, I think, in a way in which no schoolmaster ever had, never really inspired me in the same way. But when I think about him and how he taught me, it's not just the things he taught me, all that theology and philosophy. I've probably forgotten most of it. It wasn't so much the things he taught me, it was him. It was who he was. It was the relationship I had with him. That's what transformed me and changed me and made me move forward and helped me. And I suppose that's very much true, I think it's very much true, of the doctor, the psychiatrist, the therapist, the analyst. It's very much to do with the quality of the relationship. So this is a deep kind of therapy, education I'm trying to talk about. A kind of reflective, contemplative engagement. In fact, Lacan refers to psychoanalysis as a form of theoria, a form of contemplation. And he points also to the fact that this involves the analyst, psychiatrist, in an ascesis, in a asceticism. Ascesis means literally in Greek training. It was used initially in the training, the word used in the training of athletes. But it came to mean asceticism in the sense of monks fasting and so on. Lacan uses it in the sense of the analyst withholding himself somehow, withholding his words, of course, not just saying anything that comes into his head, measuring it carefully, allowing the other to respond and think and work through the material, not rushing them. And this points, I think, to another key paradox in the caring work that we do. And that's the paradox of the kind of discourse that we're involved in, the therapeutic discourse. It's both an inwardness, but of course, discourse, the symbolic, conversation, dialogue is all about going out to others, involving others, talking to others, sharing with others. But the therapeutic discourse is paradoxical because it's also about turning inward, turning away from others, reflecting, going within, into the psyche, to the unconscious. That inward turn is absolutely essential. So there's a link I'm trying to suggest between education, learning, coming to conferences, training to be a psychiatrist, and the therapeutic course, the journey of therapy and the journey of education. They share something very, very closely. And in both, allowing the word to come in, holding on to it, thinking carefully about it, capturing it somehow, and allowing it to transform us is key. But which word, of course, of mine, if any, will speak to you, we don't know. I don't know. And it'll be different for different people. And it's true of all the things that we will hear today. This was brought home to me the other day. I saw an illustration of a 14th century picture of Hippocrates. It was a kind of icon. It looked like a religious icon, but it was Hippocrates. And he was sitting on a chair in the way those iconic figures do, with a book open. And written in the book, I was rather pleased I could remember enough Greek to read it. And it said, "Life is short. Art is long. The important thing is getting the timing right." Thank you.
Somebody